So good evening, and I wanted to say first, thank you all for being here. I know that all of you have somewhere else that you could be tonight, so thank you for making the choice to come here and the effort to come here and be part of this community. And that's what tonight is all about, right? It's a community. It's for all of you to be part of Women Techmakers and more broadly, the community of women in tech. So why am I standing up here? It's certainly not for me to tell you my story of being a woman in tech. But that's also part of the point. It's because it's a problem. It's something that I care about very deeply. That I'd like to see better representation of women in technology, and I think that it's important that it's not just women's voices that we hear, and it's not just a women's problem to increase the representation of women in technology. And so I thought I would share some of my thoughts on diversity and specifically on inclusion. So last year I went to Grace Hopper. Who knows about Grace Hopper? Great. This is the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing. It's a conference that they call a celebration, and I love it. It changes the mood immediately when it's a celebration. You know, people who've been there, you know, there's a lot more smiles than you would expect to see at something that would be called a conference. And for me as a manager, so as Marilla mentioned, I'm a manager here at Google. It was filled with really interesting information, essentially about supporting women in their careers in technology. And at a really high level, you know, it was about thinking outside of the box rather than that there being, you know, one kind of engineer. You might break that box down and think, you know, there's male engineers and female engineers, and surprise, surprise, there might be some differences between these groups, you know, that you might want to take into account. And it was about all the different aspects of a career, you know, from hiring, recruiting, interviewing, things like that, supporting women in their careers, looking for leadership opportunities and how to promote women leaders in tech companies. But when I actually got down to thinking about the content that was being presented, and, you know, the advice that was being given, almost none of it was actually specific to women. Right? All of it really, or almost all of it, was about treating people as individuals. You know, like looking, like I said, instead of there being one box for engineers, for example, and splitting into two boxes, it was really about treating people as the individuals that they are and realizing that everybody has a different set of needs, you know, that you need to support. A good example of that might be recruiting. You know, so Google famously and many tech companies do technical interviews, right? Where, you know, you get up in a room and you're asked some technical questions. And usually, traditionally, these have been done on a whiteboard, right? So at some point during the interview, you'll end up writing on a whiteboard. You'll write some code on a whiteboard, which, by the way, is not what we spend our time doing at Google, right? Like, this is not the job that you're being hired to do. We don't stand around all day writing code on a whiteboard. We write code on computers, you know, with keys sitting down or standing up if you have a standing desk, writing at a computer. And it turns out that many people, this may come as a huge shock to you, many people perform better if you ask them to write code on a computer the way that they're used to doing all the time, rather than saying, hey, guess what? You know, stand up here and write code on a whiteboard. And it turns out the reason that we were talking about this at Grace Hopper is that that's particularly true for women, right? So it was something that they were pointing out in terms of making sure that your hiring processes work well for women. But actually, more generally than that, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden you ask men to stand up and write at a whiteboard, and you ask women to stand up, to sit down and write at a desk with a computer. It's about having the options so that everybody can demonstrate their skills in the right way, and that goes for everybody, you know. And I think I've talked to plenty of men as well who would much prefer to be writing their code on a computer rather than writing at a whiteboard. And so this is getting to this point of inclusion, right? So essentially for me, inclusion is about creating an environment where people can be themselves, you know, express themselves as an individual and be the best that they can be. And that's something that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about tonight. So again, you might be thinking, why am I here? I'm a white man in tech. What could I possibly have to say about inclusion? You know, what story do I have? And so actually, I've spent a fair bit of my life in places where I haven't been in the majority. And the story I want to tell you tonight is from 20 years ago when I was living in Japan. So I was just out of school. I was on an exchange student program in Japan, and so I was living with a Japanese family. I spoke a little bit of Japanese when I first got there, but almost nothing. And the family that I was living with was not in a big city. They're in a tiny village, literally surrounded by rice fields, in quite a remote part of Japan. And this meant that I was not only the only foreigner in my village, I was the only non-ethnically Japanese person in probably at least 10 kilometers, around where I was living. It meant that everybody that I met, everybody that saw me knew immediately who I was. But actually they didn't know who I was, right? They knew what I was. I was the foreigner. I was the gaijin. Who's heard the word gaijin before? Yeah, so gaijin it just means foreigner, right? It's an abbreviation. The real word is gaikokujin. And it's not necessarily a bad word in itself. But it depends how it's being used and certainly depends on how you're hearing it. All I knew is that all of a sudden that was a word that I heard a lot. Like I literally couldn't walk down the street without hearing this word at least a couple of times. Not every single, but every time I would go out, somebody who maybe had never walked past a gaijin before would see me and then would start talking to their friend about the fact that they just saw a gaijin. And I knew for sure that every time I heard that word that it was me that they were talking about. It was not like a random coincidence, that they were using this word. It was definitely 100% me. And the thing that this made me feel, it might be something that many of you have felt too, is just different. Right? Like immediately, obviously, completely different. And it was a difference that was pointed out to me every time I heard a word like that. And at first, I thought it was my problem, like there was something wrong with me because of this. Something wrong that I was doing that was making me feel this way. And there were definitely things that I could do to improve, so I thought, I'm going to really learn Japanese as well as I can and really understand Japanese culture and try and, get past this. This is a problem that I can solve. And I worked really hard at those things, right? So I worked really hard at learning Japanese, and it's something that I'm really grateful for, having something that really drove me to learn Japanese really well while I was there. But despite that, I had this experience multiple times while I was living in Japan where, and my Japanese was getting better while I was there. I'd start a conversation with somebody, and I'd talk to them in Japanese, and they'd listen, and they'd look at me. And then when I stopped talking, they'd then immediately turn to the Japanese person standing next to me. They go like this, and say, "Look, he can speak Japanese." And this happened a few times, so I'd get used to trying to ignore it. I'd turn back and I'd speak to them some more. Come on, let's have a conversation. We can do this. And they'd listen and they'd look, and then they'd turn back and say, "Yeah, he's really quite good. It's amazing." And I felt like just saying, "I'm here. Hello. I'm a person. You can talk to me." And for some people, there was just this basic, I don't know if this resonates with any of you, if you feel like you've been in a situation like this. But for some people, it was just impossible to get over that barrier where, they stopped treating me just as a stereotype, stopped treating me just as the gaijin, the foreigner, and started actually connecting with me as a person. And this was by no means universal, right? And I had a fabulous time in Japan. And the reason that I had a fabulous time is because of those people who looked past the stereotypes, right? Who looked past me just being, a foreigner, and talked to me as a person and realized that I came from a different background. I had a different set of skills and I had a different set of experiences. And that was actually part of the wonderful thing, in terms of friendships and so forth. We could have conversations and exchange ideas that, two Japanese people speaking together might not be able to have because we've got a different mix of information and background and so on. And so that's why I think it's so important for us, it's so valuable for us to be treated as individuals. And that goes for everybody, right? I think that it's all that everybody in this room wants is for us to be valued for who we are. Like I said, we all have different backgrounds, different experiences. We all have different skills and abilities. We all have goals and ambitions. We're all working in tech and we all want to do something amazing, change the world through working in tech. And the right way for us to do that is by building an inclusive environment And it's something that's equally applicable, I think, to men and women. If we can understand people as individuals and the things that they need, the right way to understand who they are, and then help them through their careers, that's what I think will really build a truly diverse workforce, a place where we can all be happy being ourselves. So with that, I wanted to hand the rest of this evening back over to all of you. You're all individuals and you're all here as part of a community. I hope that you've enjoyed yourselves tonight. I hope you've learned something. I hope you've had some fun. And I hope that you meet somebody new. I hope you take a chance to meet somebody new here tonight. Thank you so much for coming out. And it's been a real pleasure having you here at Google. Thank you.